talking about all of those different reports that you get during the registration period. So you have the actual registration reports, which include civilian registrations that take place through student planning. You have all of the Go Army Ed registrations, the ones that are automatic, which I think we discovered last registration period, and then the ones processed by the registration specialist. And then you've also got the registration forms that the advisors process. In addition to that, we've got delinquent reports, overload reports, and less than half-time report. And I'm sure that there are several other different reports that do get generated for you guys to look at and process during the registration period. But these are the 4 main ones that we're going to review today. So why do we check enrollment reports? Well, primarily because it helps our students. We prevent them from taking courses they don't need, which in turn saves them money. It also shows them that we're checking in on them and we're invested in what they're doing. And if they feel a sense of loyalty to Troy through that, then they're going to continue to return to Troy again and again. So when we are going through these reports, the primary thing you want to look for is, are they in the right course? And that's not just in their major, but it's going to include their general studies, the major, the minor, the free electives. And if they're not in the right class, why is that? We also want to look and check on their graduation. Are they close to graduation? Have they filed an intent to graduate and they've left a course off that they still need? Do they need to file an intent to graduate? We also want to check if the student has a valid catalog year. We know that those are available for 8 years before they expire. And for our graduate students, we also want to make sure that their courses are within the 8-year time frame as well. We want to make sure students have minimum GPA standards. We can often tell just by looking at the GPA if they're on probation or not. And so this will help save you from having so many delinquent reports later if you're paying attention to that. We want to make sure that we check the section number as well, and if it makes sense based on their location. So no Orlando students registered for Montgomery classes. And we want to make sure that their sequencing requirement for the literature or history and the general studies is being taken care of, and we'll get more into that in a minute. So when a student is enrolled in an incorrect course, we are supposed to call them immediately and send a follow-up email. A lot of the times what happens is they'll tell us, well, I talked to my faculty advisor or I talked to the department chair and they made this suggestion to replace another course. And that's totally fine, and if they tell you that that's what's going on, then we need to go ahead and start this substitution process. Because if they're getting financial aid and they're in a course that doesn't look like it belongs on their program evaluation, we know financial aid's not going to pay for it. For those students who are getting close to graduation, we want to see, does it look like they could reasonably file an ITG within the next 3 terms or so? That gives us an idea of how they're going to plan and that sort of thing. And I like to use the term reasonably complete because it doesn't say you need to go ahead because you are going to be finished. It says it looks like you can complete by this date. Do you plan on completing by that date? So if we are contacting the student about that, we want to make sure we send them the link to the ITG form and remind them of that $60 graduation fee that's applied. And it's important to mention that every time, even if you've talked to the student 5 times about graduation and you only mention it 4 times, the one time that you didn't mention it is the time the phone call is going to be pulled or the email is going to be sent. With our academic catalogs, there's several different things we want to look at, and it's not just is the catalog expired or not. We also want to look at, is the catalog the most beneficial choice for the student? Would moving to a new catalog eliminate some of the courses they have to take? A lot of us who were here back when the 2015-2016 catalog was introduced saw how the new general studies arrangement was knocking off 3 and 4 classes for some of our students. And there are other updates that happened. The business degree, they had a change in one of their catalogs where the Math 2201 was no longer a requirement, and so our business students benefited from making those kinds of changes. If you ever are suggesting an updated catalog, just make sure that you know that the benefits outweigh any of the negativity, and be aware of exactly what it is that's going to change. Don't just say, well, you won't have as many classes. Say you're going to reduce your classes because you no longer are required to have COM 2241. And then, of course, like I said before, if you've got graduate students, just a quick glance at the years that they took their courses, because some students, especially with the non-traditional students that we have, do take 8 or more years to complete these degrees. And with our section numbers, it's pretty standard. I think this is probably one of the ones we have the hardest time paying attention to because we're so used to students registering for courses that have an XTI section number. And if it's XTI, that means it's online, which means that you can be anywhere in the world and take it. But there are occasions where you will see some other section numbers pop up. So just be aware that if the student is suddenly taking Montgomery courses, they may or may not mean to do that. They may live in Montgomery or they may live somewhere else. So you just want to check with them. And, you know, there are situations where I've had students who have a home address in Florida, but they're going to be in Texas for an extended period of time so they can take Texas classes or what have you. So with all of that stuff that we have to check, it can be really hard to sort of keep up with checking your registration reports, but we should try and check them every day. I know registration's busy, and I know especially during the first week or so, that's when we get bombarded with the most registrations at one time. But we still need to try and find some time to set aside every day to check them. And if you can only check 10 students at a time and then you've got to do something else, then adopt that practice and try to find more time later on in the day. And they want us to find if there are problems. Because if you're anything like me when I was a student, as soon as I was registered, I had the book bought within the next 2 days or so. And so if you're able to catch those right after they happen, we can help prevent students buying the wrong books and having to go through the refund process. We also know that certain classes fill up a lot more quickly than others, and instructors are not required to allow extra students in if they fill up. So what happens if we put off checking our registration reports for a few days and then the class the student really needed is no longer available? Then that student has to hopefully find an alternative. So checking the enrollment reports are pretty easy to do. The team leaders have come up with a check sheet that allows us to go through them pretty quickly. Now this is the bare minimum, but it is stuff that we do want you to be checking just to make sure that we are all on the same page. So on the first page of the program evaluation, you want to make sure that the catalog year is still valid, and if the student needs to file an I2G, have they? We want to check the GPA. Normally that's at the top of the second page or the very bottom of the first page. And then we want to look for general studies. Are they taking general studies that they need? And in addition to that, are they taking general studies prerequisites that they may need later on for their major or their minor? We talked about the literature and history sequence a minute ago. We want to make sure that they are taking a sequence as part of their general studies requirements instead of having those be 2 extra requirements they end up having to take later. I have seen students who will sign up for History 1111 and say, you know, I really don't want to take the second part of U.S. history, I want to take Western Civ. Well, their evaluation is probably set up so that they can do that in their general studies, but it won't fulfill their sequencing requirement at the same time. So just mention those kinds of things to the students because they're not always aware. I've had several students who will actually look at the sequencing area and say, are those 2 additional classes I need to take other than what I've already done? So that does happen. For your major and minor courses, just make sure that the courses are part of the degree program. And for the programs that have a senior level requirement, make sure that if you see something populating in senior level area, it should be populating somewhere else on the evaluation. The only time that that is not the case is if every other space on that evaluation has been filled up and the student just needs additional coursework to complete that requirement. And as we know, that's not going to be on the newer programs coming up this fall. And then in other courses, if you see a course listed in the other courses section, it's probably something that doesn't apply to their program, but there are a few programs where you do see major elective courses that don't populate correctly. One of the big ones that I remember are the history courses. For some reason, they don't always populate exactly where they need to go. And so that we have a checklist to guide us. How do we actually need to go about doing the process? There's no right or wrong way to check the reports. Typically, if you can explain to your team leader how your process works and it's going through the checklist, you're going to be fine. Some people like to do all of their checking on the computer through an Excel spreadsheet. Some people like to print them and just highlight. So whatever method works for you is fine. Your team leaders will be sitting with you periodically during the registration period to see how your registration reports are going and how you're processing them. So again, just go through the checklist and be able to explain what it is you're doing and you should be fine. So what do you do when you identify a student in the wrong course or somebody that has other problems that's wrong with their degree? Is you want to make sure you call them and notify them of the problem, and sending up a follow-up email. Anytime you contact them during registration about any problems or issues you encounter, code it in STRK with the REG code. And what we try to do is make multiple attempts to contact the student. So each time you attempt to contact them about an issue, you want to put it in STRK to show that you've made multiple attempts to contact them. So we want to make sure that we're calling and that we're doing so multiple times to get the issue resolved, because there's been too many instances in the past where a student will say, oh, I didn't know about this, and there was only one or two instances where we could prove that somebody had tried to contact them. So we want to leave no doubt that an attempt was made. And then of course throughout the day, if you encounter students in the wrong courses, just keep a list to forward to your team leader at the end of the day so that they can contact financial aid, and your team leader will let you know about the approximate time they want those lists sent to them. Now occasionally you will have students who are in the wrong class and they tell you they know that and they want to stay in it anyway, and that could be because of a job requirement, or it just may be a class that they think is really interesting, and that's fine technically. If they are met all of the prerequisites for the course, they can stay in the course as long as they want to. So what you want to do in those situations is remind them that any academic penalties and financial aid penalties still apply. So if they fail a class, it can put them on probation even though the course is not part of their degree plan. It can impact their GPA. It can lead to them being suspended or dropped from program. And with financial aid, even though it won't pay for the course, it still gets calculated into the SAP results. It still gets calculated into the 150% and time framed period. So it still can impact them greatly, even if it's just a financial aid doesn't want to pay for it, but I want to take it anyway sort of scenario. And so with all these things you have to check, there's a potential that you have a whole list of students at the end of the day who you need to contact, and some of them are more important than others. Right away, and the most urgent one that you'll need to contact is going to be the students who are in the wrong courses. We want to call them immediately. If you come across a student who needs to file their intent to graduate, sometimes that can wait a few days. It can wait till the end of the week. The only time that that's not the case is if the deadline is at the end of the day or something like that, and that would then mean that you would need to prioritize them as well. Things like declaring minors, though, they get reminders every month about doing that. So if you want to wait till you get a big list of them and then send out a reminder, that's something you can do as well. That brings us into delinquent reports, and delinquent reports are basically when you have students who are registered for too many semester hours based on their status, and that can be probationary, conditional, or temporary. So for our undergraduate students, that means you get a maximum of 7 hours for the term until your status is changed to unconditional. So when we see this, we want to call them, we want to email them using their personal and Troy email addresses. And what I like to do is give them a time period of approximately 3 days and say, you have 3 days to drop these courses until you're down to 7 or less hours. And if not, I will go and randomly select one to drop for you. And a great thing that you can do to help yourself so that you don't forget is go into your Outlook calendar and create an event or a reminder so that it'll pop up and tell you when to go and do that. If you go and check at the end of the 3 days and they're still in too many hours, then you need to try and choose a course that's going to cause them the least amount of harm to drop. So that means, like, you probably don't want to drop that math class if that's going to be a prerequisite for something else. One of the courses that they suggest is look for the obstacle or the DWF courses as being ones that you go to drop as well. Sometimes it's harder than other times when you're making a decision. You also want to go into STRK and document the event, including when you originally told them about being in too many hours. You want to document and contact the student after you've dropped a course. Now, there will be occasions where you know that the status of the student is going to change within the next week or so. You know they may be getting cleared from admissions, or you know that the grade they're making in their course is an A, so it's going to take them off of probation, those sorts of things. So if you know that's coming up, let your team leader know that that change is happening. And in those situations, as long as it's only a week or so, you don't have to go in and drop them. Anything longer, though, would probably be a good idea to drop them. So taking an overload is very, very similar to the delinquent reports. In this case, they're taking more than the maximum allotted hours for unconditional students. And if you contact them and they tell you they've got department chair approval or faculty advisor approval, then you need to get that information imaged and then let your team leader or other designated official know about it so they can be removed from the report. If they don't have approval, give them the same limitation, go in and drop them as needed, and of course report all of this in STRK. That leads us to less than half-time reports. These are for students who are in less than 3 hours of courses during the term. You need to be in a minimum of 3 hours to get partial Pell Grants and other loans. If you're in 6 hours, you can receive full Pell Grant and loans. So these lists normally include students in 1 or 2 hours, and normally you'll see that these are students who are taking orientation by itself. So you just want to contact these students and let them know how their financial aid is impacted because of the number of hours they've chosen to take. Some other notes to cover would be, we want to make sure that students who are in remedial courses have taken Compass Placement exam prior to enrolling, or else financial aid won't pay for it. And one of the things that I think a lot of people forget to do is check those remedial courses that show up on the registration reports, because they don't show up on the evaluation. So you would want to go to EXAC and TSUM to make sure that the course is appropriate for their needs. And then finally, English 1101 and 1102 must be completed in the first 30 hours at Troy. And it is possible to place a hold on the account once they've exceeded those 30 hours if they have not taken those English courses. So to summarize all of that, we just need to make sure that we're checking our reports in a timely manner and that we pay attention to those courses that aren't needed for the program. Other problems such as missing minors, prerequisite problems, section numbers, and catalog expirations are important to take note of as well. We want to make sure that we're being proactive and we're calling and emailing the students and letting them know about problems that can occur and have already occurred. And we want to document any of these problems that we face in STRK to help the student out and create a record.